In 1940, President Franklin Roosevelt made a bold declaration that would echo through history. America would build 50,000 aircraft in a single year. Across the Atlantic Ocean, in the halls of Nazi power, Hermann Göring, Hitler's second-in-command and head of the mighty Luftwaffe, burst into laughter. He called it pure propaganda, a bluff, nothing but American fantasy designed to scare the Reich. To Göring, the idea was absurd, laughable, completely impossible. But Göring's laughter would soon turn to horror, because America didn't just build 50,000 planes. They built over 300,000. This is the story of history's greatest industrial miscalculation, and how the sleeping giant of American manufacturing awoke to change the course of World War II forever. Let's set the scene. By May of 1940, the world was watching in absolute shock as Nazi Germany steamrolled across Europe with terrifying speed and efficiency. Poland had fallen in just weeks. Denmark surrendered in hours. Norway, despite fierce resistance, was overwhelmed. And then came the unthinkable. France, the great military power with the largest army in Western Europe, collapsed in just 40 days. The Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, seemed unstoppable. The Luftwaffe controlled the skies, German panzers rolled across open country unopposed, and Hitler's war machine appeared invincible. Britain stood alone, bracing for invasion. The United States, still officially neutral, watched with growing alarm. America had spent the 1930s largely isolationist, focused on recovering from the Great Depression, reluctant to be drawn into another European war. But by the spring of 1940, it was becoming terrifyingly clear that if Britain fell, the entire democratic world would be in mortal danger. On May 16, 1940, with France on the brink of total collapse, President Roosevelt addressed a joint session of Congress with an audacious, almost unbelievable goal. He called for the production of 50,000 military aircraft per year. Not just any aircraft, fighters, bombers, transport planes, trainers, an entire air force built from virtually nothing. He wanted America to become, in his words, the great arsenal of democracy. Now here's the problem. In 1939, just 1 year before Roosevelt's speech, the United States had produced only 2,141 military aircraft. The entire U.S. Army Air Corps had fewer than 2,500 planes total, and many of them were obsolete biplanes that wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes against modern German fighters. America's aviation industry was small, scattered, and focused primarily on civilian aircraft. Roosevelt was calling for a 2,300% increase in production. It was the kind of goal that seemed to defy logic, economics, and physical reality. When Hermann Göring heard about Roosevelt's plan, he was utterly dismissive. Göring was no fool. He was a World War I flying ace, a recipient of the Pour le Mérite, Germany's highest military honor. He had rebuilt the Luftwaffe from nothing into the world's most powerful air force. He understood aviation, industry, and warfare, and he was absolutely convinced that Roosevelt's plan was impossible. According to various accounts, Göring scoffed. What is America but millionaires, beauty queens, stupid records, and Hollywood? He saw America as a soft nation, obsessed with consumer goods and entertainment, with no understanding of real industrial warfare. He believed the Luftwaffe had already proven German superiority. Why should he fear a country that made refrigerators and automobiles? But Hermann Göring had made a catastrophic error in judgment. He didn't understand America's true strength. He was about to learn a lesson that would cost Germany the war. What Göring failed to grasp was that America wasn't just a nation of millionaires and Hollywood starlets. It was the world's greatest industrial power, and had been for decades. In the 1930s, even during the depths of the Great Depression, America produced more automobiles than the rest of the world combined. In 1929, American factories built over 5 million cars. Companies like Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler had perfected mass production on a scale never before seen in human history. Henry Ford's revolutionary assembly line had transformed manufacturing. The concepts of interchangeable parts, standardized processes, and continuous flow production had created an industrial system that could produce complex machines with breathtaking speed and efficiency. A Model T that once took 12 hours to build could be completed in just 93 minutes. This wasn't just about cars. It was a philosophy of manufacturing that could be applied to anything. And now that massive industrial machine was about to pivot to war. Within months of Roosevelt's declaration, the transformation began. Automobile factories across America started retooling their production lines. Ford's massive Willow Run plant in Michigan, a facility 1 mile long, was converted to produce B-24 Liberator bombers. This wasn't a simple switch. A B-24 had 1.2 million parts compared to about 15,000 in a car. But American engineers figured it out. At peak production, Willow Run completed one 4-engine heavy bomber every 63 minutes, one bomber every hour. It was industrial warfare on a scale the world had never seen. General Motors converted facilities to build TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. Chrysler made fuselages for B-29 Superfortresses. Douglas Aircraft ramped up production of everything from cargo planes to dive bombers. Companies with no aviation experience whatsoever joined the effort. A furniture manufacturer in Grand Rapids, Michigan, started building aircraft components. A piano company in New York began making wing assemblies for gliders. A toy company started producing compasses. Every factory that could contribute did contribute, but factories alone weren't enough. You need workers, and that's where another revolution occurred. With millions of American men joining the military and shipping overseas, women entered the industrial workforce in unprecedented numbers. Rosie the Riveter wasn't just a propaganda poster. She represented millions of real women who built the arsenal of democracy. By 1943, women made up more than 30% of the aircraft industry workforce. Many had never worked outside the home before. Now they were riveting bomber fuselages, installing hydraulic systems, and wiring electrical panels. The training programs were massive. Aircraft companies set up schools to teach tens of thousands of workers the specialized skills needed to build combat aircraft. The government funded training programs. Community colleges adapted their curriculums. In some plants, the workforce grew from a few hundred to over 40,000 in just 2 years. American engineers also innovated constantly to make planes easier and faster to build. They simplified designs, created standardized parts that could be used across multiple aircraft types, and developed new manufacturing techniques. The B-24 Liberator, for example, was specifically designed to be easier to mass produce than the B-17 Flying Fortress. Every improvement, every innovation, multiplied across hundreds of factories nationwide. Now let's talk numbers, because the numbers tell a story that's almost hard to believe. In 1941, America produced 19,433 military aircraft. That same year, Göring's Luftwaffe produced about 11,000. America had already surpassed Germany, and this was still before Pearl Harbor, before America was even officially at war. In 1942, the first full year of American involvement in World War II, American factories built 47,836 aircraft. They had nearly reached Roosevelt's supposedly impossible goal of 50,000 in just 2 years. But America didn't stop there. The industrial machine was just getting warmed up. In 1943, American factories produced 85,898 aircraft. In 1944, at the peak of production, they built 96,318 aircraft. That's more than 170 planes per day, every single day, for an entire year. From 1940 to 1945, the United States produced over 300,000 military aircraft. 300,000. That number is so large it's almost abstract, so let me put it in perspective. Germany, with its entire industrial base focused on total war, with millions of slave laborers, with every resource of occupied Europe at its disposal, produced about 119,000 aircraft during the entire war. Japan built roughly 76,000. Britain, fighting for its very survival, managed about 131,000. The Soviet Union, with massive aid from American Lend-Lease, produced around 157,000. America alone outproduced all the Axis powers combined, and it did so while also building the world's largest navy, supplying allies around the globe, feeding much of the free world, and maintaining a civilian economy that actually grew during the war. Let's get specific about some aircraft. The B-24 Liberator, 18,482 built, more than any other American military aircraft in history. The P-47 Thunderbolt fighter, 15,636 built. The P-51 Mustang, the fighter that would escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back, over 15,000 built. The B-17 Flying Fortress, 12,731 built. The C-47 transport plane, over 10,000 built. Every single one of these aircraft types alone exceeded the total production runs of most German aircraft. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. Every single one of these aircraft had to be flown by trained crews. They needed fuel, ammunition, spare parts, maintenance. They had to be shipped overseas, assembled, tested. The logistics alone were a miracle of organization that involved millions of people. And they made a difference. By 1944, the Allies owned the skies over Europe. The mighty Luftwaffe, once the world's most feared air force, was being systematically destroyed by sheer numbers and industrial might. German pilots were being thrown into combat with minimal training because there wasn't enough fuel to train them properly. Experienced crews were gone, killed over the skies of Germany, France, and Britain. Hermann Göring's laughter had long since died. By 1943, even Göring had to acknowledge the catastrophic error. During a meeting with his staff, he admitted something that must have been agonizing. When I saw those American bombers flying over Europe in formations of hundreds, I knew the war was lost. The man who had mocked Roosevelt's 50,000 planes now watched helplessly as American bombers darkened German skies by the thousands. On a single day in 1944, the 8th Air Force alone put over 2,000 heavy bombers in the air over Germany. 2,000 in one day from one Air Force. The Luftwaffe was hemorrhaging pilots. They were losing 25% of their fighter pilots every single month by 1944. The fuel was running out. Allied bombing had destroyed synthetic fuel plants, and Romania's oil fields were lost. Experienced crews who had survived the Battle of Britain and the Eastern Front were being shot down over their own homeland. In April 1945, as Germany collapsed into ruins and the Third Reich entered its final days, Hermann Göring was captured by American forces. During his interrogation and later at the Nuremberg trials, he was questioned about German intelligence failures. His response revealed the depth of his miscalculation and the shocking blindness of Nazi leadership. "We never thought you could produce so much," he admitted. "Even when we saw the numbers, even when our intelligence reported them, we thought they were propaganda. We believed it was impossible. We thought the figures were inflated by a factor of 10. Even when your bombers filled our skies, we couldn't believe the scale of your production." But it wasn't impossible. It was American industrial power, unleashed, focused, and absolutely unstoppable. The story of America's aircraft production during World War II isn't just about numbers and factories. It's about what a free society can achieve when its existence is threatened. It's about factory workers, many of them women, many working their first industrial jobs, who knew that every rivet they drove, every wire they connected, every panel they installed might save the life of someone's son, someone's brother, someone's husband fighting overseas. It's about innovation and adaptation. It's about taking the lessons learned from building cars and refrigerators and applying them to building instruments of war. It's about capitalism and democracy proving they could mobilize resources on a scale that totalitarian regimes couldn't match. The infrastructure, skills, and technologies developed during this period laid the foundation for America's post-war aerospace dominance. Companies like Boeing, Lockheed, and Douglas, which grew from small manufacturers into industrial giants during the war, would go on to dominate commercial and military aviation for generations. The engineers and workers who built P-51s and B-17 would go on to build the jets that broke the sound barrier, and eventually the rockets that put men on the moon. But perhaps most importantly, it's a lesson about the danger of underestimating your opponent. Hermann Göring looked at America and saw only Hollywood and millionaires. He saw a soft, comfortable nation with no stomach for real war. He missed the factories, the engineers, the workers, the innovation, and most critically, the will to fight. He assumed that because America chose to focus on consumer goods in peacetime, it lacked the industrial capacity for war. He couldn't have been more wrong. Göring made the mistake that many have made throughout history. He judged a nation by its peacetime priorities and missed its wartime potential. He saw the surface and missed the depth. He counted Germany's advantages and discounted America's strengths. In 1940, Hermann Göring laughed at the idea of 50,000 planes. He thought it was a bluff, a fantasy, an impossible dream from a president trying to intimidate the Reich. By 1945, America had built 300,000 aircraft. Roosevelt's impossible promise had become reality, and Göring's laughter had become one of history's most costly miscalculations, a mistake that helped seal the fate of Nazi Germany and change the course of human history. Sometimes the greatest mistake in war isn't underestimating your enemy's weapons. It's underestimating their will, their ingenuity, their capacity to transform, and the industrial soul of a nation that, when threatened, can move mountains, reshape industries, and build an arsenal that staggers the imagination. Hermann Göring learned that lesson too late. By the time he understood the true scale of American industrial power, the war was already lost, and his laughter had turned to ashes.